He had built his empire on silence, fear, and blood, and he threw it all away for a woman who smiled prettier at parties. Lucien Devereaux, the most feared crime boss in New York, sat across from his wife of 7 years and slid a single black card across the table like she was a coat check girl. $10,000. That was what 7 years was worth to him. What he didn't see, what he never bothered to see, was the old man sitting in the corner of that room, watching everything. And that old man was about to burn Lucien's entire world to the ground. Stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The conference room on the 44th floor of the Meridian Tower smelled like leather and cold coffee, and the particular kind of quiet that only exists when men with power are trying not to show how much they want something. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan moved the way it always moved. Indifferent, relentless, enormous, and none of it cared at all about the woman sitting on the wrong side of the long mahogany table. Vivian Ashcroft Devereaux had arrived 12 minutes early. She had selected her own chair, poured her own water, and sat with her hands folded in her lap while the room filled slowly around her. Her dress was charcoal gray. Her hair was pinned back with no particular elegance. She wore no jewelry except a plain gold band on her left hand that had lost most of its shine years ago. Not from neglect, but from the relentless invisible work of hands that were never meant to be idle. The attorneys entered first, then the financial advisors, then the two men Lucien kept close at all times. Marcus Webb, his head of security, and Dorian Falk, a lawyer whose entire career had been built on making inconvenient facts disappear. They settled into their chairs with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this before. Cleared their throats, opened folders, did not look at Vivian directly, the way you avoid looking at an accident scene when you don't want the image to stay with you. Lucien Devereaux entered last. He always entered last. He was 43 years old, dark-haired, broad through the shoulder, and possessed of the particular physical stillness that comes not from discipline, but from the absolute certainty that nothing in a room can hurt you. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he moved through the space like he owned it, which, technically, he did. The Meridian Tower's top 4 floors were registered to a shell company that traced back, through 7 intermediary entities, to a holding trust that Vivian had personally structured 8 years ago, long before she ever understood exactly what kind of man she was helping. He sat down without looking at her. She watched him. He opened the folder in front of him, scanned the first page, and then, finally, he looked up. His eyes were dark brown and very steady, and entirely without apology. "You've read the terms," he said. It was not a question. "I've read them," Vivian said. Dorian Falk cleared his throat again. "Mrs. Devereaux, we've structured the settlement to reflect the contributions you made to the household during the course of the—" "She knows what it reflects." Lucien's voice was flat. Not cruel, exactly. Worse than cruel. Bored. "Viv, you'll have the apartment on Riverside through the end of the year. The accounts are outlined on page 3. It's fair." Vivian did not open the folder. Across the room, in a chair set slightly apart from the table, a chair that had been placed there at Vivian's quiet, specific request, an old man sat without speaking. He was perhaps 78, thin in the way of men who had once been powerful builders of things, and had become in age more essential rather than less. His suit was dark and unremarkable. His face was the face of a man who had learned long ago that the most dangerous position in any room is the one nobody thinks to watch. His name was Victor Ashcroft. He had not been introduced. Lucien had noticed him when he entered the room, assessed him in approximately 1.5 seconds. Elderly advisor, probably the wife's, probably here for emotional support, irrelevant, and had not looked at him since. Victor sat with his hands resting on the arms of his chair and watched Lucien Devereaux with the patient attention of a man who has all the time in the world and absolutely nothing to prove. "The apartment isn't in the settlement," Vivian said. Dorian Falk's pen stopped moving. Lucien tilted his head very slightly. "What?" "The Riverside apartment isn't listed in the settlement. Page 3 describes a monthly maintenance allowance for a property that appears to be in my name already, which means you're not offering me the apartment. You're offering me access to my own asset and calling it a concession. She paused. I'm just noting the discrepancy. The room was quiet. Marcus Webb, near the door, shifted his weight. Lucien studied his wife for a moment with an expression that was not quite contempt and not quite respect, and existed uncomfortably somewhere between the two. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and withdrew a matte black card. Thin, heavy, the kind that has no visible limit because the limit has never been necessary to print, and slid it across the mahogany surface toward her. It traveled the length of the table with almost no sound. It stopped 2 inches from her folded hands. 10,000, he said. Use it however you want. Think of it as a thank you. Vivian looked at the card. She did not touch it. A thank you, she said. For your time. He leaned back. Something in his posture had shifted, a loosening, like a man who has concluded a meeting he found mildly tedious and is beginning to think about the next one. 7 years is a long time. I'm not ungrateful. You're not ungrateful, she repeated. Viv. His voice carried the particular exhaustion of a man who has decided that patience is a performance he no longer needs to maintain. Don't make this complicated. She finally looked up at him. Not with anger, not with tears. With something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. The expression of a person who has just confirmed something they already knew. I'm not making anything complicated, she said. I'm just listening to you very carefully. Lucien glanced briefly at his lawyers with an expression that said, wrap this up. And then he said the thing that he had clearly been building toward, the thing he had probably rehearsed, though he would never admit that because men like Lucien Devereaux do not rehearse, they simply decide, and then they speak, and then the rest of the world adjusts accordingly. I'll be announcing an engagement in about 3 weeks. Selena and I... He paused, fractionally, as though conceding that even he understood this moment required the smallest acknowledgement of its awkwardness. We've been... I know what you've been, Vivian said. The room didn't move. Lucien's jaw tightened, just slightly. Then you understand why the timeline matters. The partnership announcements are tied to the gala. The image needs to be clean, she said. Cohesive. He said it like a correction. Vivian picked up the pen on the table in front of her. She turned to the signature page. She signed her name, Vivian A. Devereaux, in handwriting that was small and precise and completely steady, and set the pen down. She pushed the folder back across the table. She did not touch the black card. Is that everything? She asked. Dorian Falk looked at Lucien. Lucien looked at his wife. Something moved across his face, there and gone, too fast to name. And then the stillness returned. That's everything, he said. Vivian stood. She buttoned the single button on her jacket. She picked up her bag. She looked around the room once, not with nostalgia, not with grief, but with the methodical thoroughness of a person taking inventory, making sure nothing of value has been left behind. She walked to the corner chair. Victor Ashcroft rose when she approached, unhurried, deliberate, and offered her his arm. She took it. They moved toward the door together. Lucien watched them go. He watched the old man's hand cover his wife's, his ex-wife's, with a steadiness that had nothing frail about it. He opened his mouth, almost spoke, and then didn't. The door closed. He looked at Dorian Falk. Who was that? He said. Falk was already on his phone. His face had gone the particular shade of pale that precedes a very specific kind of bad news, the kind that arrives not all at once, but in pieces, each one worse than the last. Sir, Falk said slowly, I need you to tell me exactly how much of our legal operating structure runs through Ashcroft Capital Holdings. Lucien's eyes narrowed. Why? Falk set his phone on the table face up so Lucien could see the screen. On it was a photograph, a profile image from the Ashcroft Capital Holdings annual report, dated 3 years prior. A formal portrait. An elderly man, dark suit, hands folded, expression of absolute and unconcerned authority. Victor Ashcroft, founder and chairman emeritus. Lucien looked at the photograph. He looked at the door. He looked back at the photograph. The silence in the room had changed quality entirely. It was no longer the silence of concluded business, but the silence of something vast and cold beginning to move. How much, Lucien said very quietly, does Ashcroft Capital control? Falk didn't answer immediately. He was still reading. His mouth moved slightly. Falk, sir. Falk set the phone down. He looked up. His expression was the expression of a man who has just realized that the building he is standing in belongs to someone else. Through direct holdings, subsidiaries, and the 3 anonymous trust structures we routed through Geneva, Ashcroft Capital has controlling interest in approximately 63% of our legitimate business portfolio. He paused. And Victor Ashcroft has 1 daughter. The room was absolutely silent. Marcus Webb, near the door, had gone very still. Lucien Devereaux sat in his leather chair on the 44th floor of a building registered to a shell company that he had always believed he owned, and looked at the closed door through which his ex-wife had just walked. On the arm of the man who controlled the legal future of everything he had spent 15 years building. And he understood, in a way that settled into his chest like a stone dropped into cold water, that something had just ended. He just didn't know yet how much. The black card still sat in the middle of the table, untouched. Vivienne did not speak until they were inside the elevator. The doors closed. Victor pressed the lobby button. The car began to descend, smooth and silent, the way things built with real money always move, with no friction, no announcement, no need to prove anything about their quality. You didn't have to come, she said. I wanted to see him, Victor said simply. And? He was quiet for a moment. Outside the elevator's glass wall, floors slipped past, descending through levels of marble and steel and the accumulated weight of other people's ambitions. He never once looked at you, Victor said. Not really, not the way a man looks at someone he believes is worth understanding. Vivienne watched the floors pass. No, she said. He didn't. Did he ever? She thought about it honestly, the way she did most things. Without comfort, without self-pity, with just the clean and sometimes brutal preference for accuracy. She thought about the early years. The first winter, when Lucien had come to her with 3 financial crises and a federal investigation, and she had solved all 4 things in 11 days using instruments he didn't know existed and connections he had never thought to cultivate. The way he had looked at her then, like she was useful, like she was surprising, like she was almost something he hadn't expected. In the beginning, she said, I think he was curious about me. That's probably the closest it got. Victor made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite the opposite. I should have told him, she said, who you were. You chose not to. I thought... She stopped, started again. I thought if he knew, he would never be certain, whether he married me for me or whether he married me for what I came from. She paused. As it turned out, the uncertainty was unnecessary. He would have married you for the money, Victor said, without particular judgment. Just the flat delivery of a man who has spent 78 years watching human nature operate and has long since stopped being surprised by it. Yes, Vivienne said, probably. And instead he married you for nothing at all, because he didn't think you were worth understanding. Yes, the elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened onto marble and pale light, and the sound of the city coming through the glass facade of the building's entrance. Victor did not immediately move. Vivienne, he said. She looked at him. What do you want to do? She had thought about this question for a long time. She had thought about it through 7 years of board meetings she attended as a ghost, financial rescues she engineered anonymously, legal protections she constructed in the dark so that a man who had never thought to ask her name in a business context could stand in rooms full of powerful people and accept credit for the stability she had built under his feet. She had thought about it on the night she found Selena Royce's name on a private calendar entry, and understood, with the same precise clarity that she brought to everything else, that the question of what she was going to do next had finally, irrevocably arrived. I want to go home, she said. Victor nodded. He stepped out of the elevator. She walked beside him through the lobby, past the security desk, past the marble columns, out through the glass doors and into the cold, clean air of a New York afternoon. Behind them, on the 44th floor, Lucien Devereaux was making phone calls. Vivienne knew what he would find. She had made sure of it. 3 blocks from the Meridian Tower, a black car waited at the curb. The driver opened the door when he saw Victor. Vivienne paused before getting in, turned briefly, looked back at the tower's glass face rising against the gray winter sky. 7 years, $10,000. A black card left untouched on a conference table. She felt something that was not grief and not anger and not relief. It was something cleaner than any of those, and colder, and considerably more focused. She got in the car. The driver closed the door. 3 weeks from now, Lucien Devereaux was going to stand in a ballroom full of everyone who mattered and announce the future he believed he had built. He was going to introduce his brilliant new partner, his beautiful new fiancée, his legitimate empire, his transformation from criminal patriarch to respected businessman. He was going to stand there in his carefully pressed suit with his careful smile and his carefully prepared remarks. And she was going to walk through the door, not to beg, not to plead, not to make a scene, just to make sure he understood exactly what he had thrown away, and exactly who had been building his empire all along, from the shadows, in silence, with her own hands, while he looked everywhere in the room except at her. The car pulled into traffic. Vivian Ashcroft folded her hands in her lap, and for the first time in 7 years, she did not have to pretend to be less than she was. The first call came at 11:47 that same night. Lucien was still in the tower. He had sent everyone else home, the lawyers, the advisors, Marcus Webb, with his careful silence and his careful eyes. And he sat alone at the long conference table with the folder open in front of him and his phone pressed against his ear and listened to a man named Gerald Hess, who managed the primary operational account through which 6 of Lucien's 12 legitimate business subsidiaries ran their payroll, tell him in a very controlled and very apologetic voice that the account had been flagged for a compliance review and that all outbound transfers had been suspended pending documentation that would take, conservatively, 4 to 6 weeks to process. Lucien said nothing for a moment. "Gerald," he said. "Mr. Devereaux," who flagged it. A pause. The request originated from the Oversight Board of Ashcroft Capital Holdings. As a primary institutional partner, they have... Lucien ended the call. He set the phone on the table. He looked at the black card still sitting in the center of the mahogany surface where Vivian had left it, untouched, 8 hours ago. He picked it up. He turned it over. The matte surface caught no light at all. It absorbed it, the way certain things absorb everything you give them and return nothing. He set it back down. He called Dorian Falk. Falk answered on the second ring, which told Lucien that Falk had not been sleeping, which told him that Falk already knew something. "Talk to me," Lucien said. "I've been going through the structure." Falk's voice had the careful flatness of a man choosing every word with the precision of someone walking across ice. "The Geneva trusts, the ones we used for the Hartwell acquisition, the Meridian Tower registration, and the Callaway Street development, all 3 of them list Ashcroft Capital as the senior institutional guarantor, which means if Ashcroft Capital withdraws its backing, they can't withdraw. The agreements have the clause." Falk stopped. Started again. "There's a clause in all 3 trust instruments, Lucien. A confidentiality and conduct clause. If the beneficial owner of the trust undergoes a significant change in personal or professional circumstance that could constitute reputational risk to the guarantor..." "That's a standard boilerplate clause, Dorian. Every trust has..." "It's not boilerplate." Falk's voice had gone very quiet. "The language is specific. It was drafted specifically. I've been looking at it for 4 hours, and I can tell you that whoever wrote this clause wrote it to be triggered by exactly one kind of event." He paused. "A divorce proceeding initiated by the beneficial owner." The room was very still. Outside the windows, Manhattan ran its late-night circuits. The distant sound of sirens, the low, persistent hum of a city that never actually sleeps, just changes into something rawer and less managed after midnight. "She wrote it," Lucien said. "I believe so, yes. Before the marriage. The trust instruments predate your marriage by approximately 14 months. Another pause. "Lucien, she built the exit clause into the foundation before she ever walked into the room with you." Lucien stood up. He walked to the window. 44 floors below, the street was a river of yellow cab lights and wet pavement. He pressed one hand against the glass. It was cold. The cold came through immediately, moved up his palm, into his wrist. He had built 15 years of this. 15 years of moving carefully through a world that would destroy you if you showed your throat, building walls and buying loyalty and learning exactly how much pressure each person in his orbit could absorb before they broke. He had never been careless. He had never been caught. He had survived 4 federal investigations, 2 attempts on his life, and a war with the Marchetti family that had nearly torn his organization apart at the seams, and he had survived all of it because he was always the most informed person in the room, except that he hadn't been. He had been sitting across from a woman for 7 years, and he had never once thought to ask who she was before she became his wife. "Get me everything," he said. "Every document, every trust, every subsidiary connection. I want to know exactly how deep this goes before morning." "I've already started," Falk said. "Lucien Poul, it goes deep." Selena Royce arrived at the tower at midnight. She came the way she always came, with the specific kind of composure that requires a great deal of maintenance and looks effortless only to people who have never had to work at anything. Her coat was dark, her heels were silent on the marble lobby floor, and her expression when she stepped out of the elevator and saw Lucien standing at the window was the expression of a woman who has assessed a situation in approximately 3 seconds and is already calculating. She was 36, sharp-faced, elegantly built, and possessed of an intelligence that was real but narrow. The kind of intelligence that excels at reading power and is not particularly interested in anything power cannot provide. She had been Lucien's consigliere for 4 years. She had been other things for 2. "You read the brief Dorian sent," he said. He didn't turn from the window. "I read it." "And?" She crossed the room and stood beside him, close enough that her shoulder nearly touched his arm, looking out at the same city he was looking at. She had a talent for positioning herself physically in ways that felt like solidarity and cost her nothing. "It's a problem," she said. "Tell me something I don't know." "The problem isn't the trust structures." She paused. "The problem is that you didn't know. For 7 years you didn't know. And now everyone else is going to know that you didn't know, and that's going to raise questions about every other thing you claim to have built." He turned and looked at her. Selena held his gaze without flinching. She had never been afraid of him, which was one of the things he had always respected about her, and which he now registered with a new and slightly unpleasant edge of uncertainty. Because a person who is never afraid of you is a person who believes they have their own exit. "What are you saying?" he said. "I'm saying the gala is in 18 days. The investment consortium announcement is in 18 days. If word gets out before then that your legitimate portfolio is 60% underwritten by the family of the woman you just divorced..." She stopped. "Lucien, the partners won't wait for an explanation. They'll move before the gala even happens. So we contain it. How? We approach Victor Ashcroft directly, man to man. There has to be a... Victor Ashcroft doesn't take meetings he hasn't scheduled himself." Selena's voice was still controlled, but something in it had shifted. A slight flattening, the verbal equivalent of a door closing. "He is not going to sit across a table from you and negotiate. He doesn't need to. He already has everything he wants. He wants his daughter embarrassed in front of... She walked out of here today with her head up and her signature on the papers, and she left your black card on the table." Selena turned to face him fully. "Victor Ashcroft's daughter is not embarrassed, Lucien. Victor Ashcroft's daughter is positioned." She let that land. "The question is whether you understand what she's positioned for." The conference room was quiet for a long moment. Lucien looked at the black card. Selena looked at Lucien. "Fix it," he said finally. "I'm working on it." "I don't want to hear that you're working on it. I want it fixed." "Then give me something to work with." Her voice had an edge now. Not quite challenge, not quite fear, something that lived in the narrow band between them. Because right now, what I'm looking at is a man who spent 7 years married to the heir of a financial empire and never once thought to verify her background. And I need to know if there's anything else you didn't think to verify. Because if there is, I need to know about it now and not in 18 days when we're standing in a ballroom and it walks through the door. The silence after that was a different quality entirely. 3 days later, the calls started. Not the kind of calls you track, the kind you feel. A lunch canceled without a specific reason, only a vague reference to scheduling. A promised introduction that simply wasn't followed up on. A partner who had been reliably responsive going suddenly, inexplicably quiet for 48 hours. Individually, each of these things meant nothing. Collectively, they meant that someone was making other calls first, and that those calls were reaching the right people before Lucian's people could get there. Marcus Webb brought it to Lucian's attention on a Tuesday morning in the private office on the 38th floor, a room with no windows that Lucien used specifically for conversations he didn't want to have in rooms with windows. "It's quiet," Marcus said. He was a large man, economical with words, who communicated most effectively through what he chose not to say. Too quiet for the week before a major announcement. The phone should be ringing. "It's ringing," Lucian said. "Not the right phones." Marcus set a single sheet of paper on the desk. 3 of the consortium's 8 primary investors have had meetings with representatives of Ashcroft Capital Holdings in the last 72 hours. No agenda items distributed in advance. All 3 meetings listed as courtesy calls. He paused. "We don't know what was said." "Find out." "I'm trying to." Marcus said it flatly, without apology, which meant he was running into walls. Whoever is running their outreach is running it clean. No digital trace, no intermediaries we can reach. Whoever Vivian Ashcroft uses to— "Mrs. Devereaux," Lucian said automatically, and then stopped, because the name wasn't right anymore, hadn't been right for 72 hours, and the reflex of it in his own mouth felt suddenly like grabbing for something that wasn't there. Marcus waited. "Whoever she uses," Lucian said. "They're good. Better than good." Marcus picked up the paper. "There's something else. The Callaway Street project. The development board filed a zoning inquiry delay this morning. Bureaucratic language, no specific reason given. But the filing came out of the city comptroller's office, and the comptroller had lunch last week with Victor Ashcroft, his chief of staff." Lucian leaned back in his chair. He breathed out through his nose, slowly, the way he had trained himself to breathe when things were trying to make him move faster than he should. He looked at the ceiling. It was a plain ceiling, painted white, no decoration, because this was a room for thinking, and Lucian had learned a long time ago that decoration was for rooms where you wanted people to feel something other than what was true. "She's not waiting," he said. "No, sir. She started before she left this building." Marcus said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Lucien brought his gaze back down to the desk. "Where is she now?" "Ashcroft Capital's headquarters. She's been there since the morning after the signing." A pause. "She went in through the main entrance. Front door. No back entrance, no side door. She walked through the lobby and took the elevator to the 41st floor, and every person in that building apparently knew exactly who she was." Marcus's voice carried the faintest register of something that was not quite admiration and not quite unease, but lived uncomfortably close to both, like she'd never left. She hadn't, in any way that mattered. The 41st floor of Ashcroft Capital's New York headquarters had been Vivian's domain from the age of 22, when Victor had first given her an office of her own, not ceremonially, not symbolically, but functionally, with actual responsibility and actual stakes, and the absolute expectation that she would perform. She had spent 6 years there before she met Lucien Devereaux at a charity fundraiser that she had attended on behalf of the Ashcroft Foundation, and she had spent the 7 years of her marriage running those same operations remotely, in pieces, in the gaps between the performances her husband required of her without knowing he was requiring them. She sat now at the desk she had used at 22. The chair was new. Everything else was the same. The clean lines, the organized surface, the single window that looked not at the skyline but at the building across the street, a deliberate choice she had made when she first decorated the space. She had never wanted to look at the horizon from here. She had wanted to look at the work directly in front of her. Across the desk sat a woman named Claire Oduya, 41, who had been managing Vivian's anonymous investment instruments for the last 4 years, and whose expression now combined professional composure with the specific kind of alertness that comes from understanding that the game has changed. "The consortium response has been faster than I expected," Claire said. She had a folder open on her lap but wasn't looking at it. 3 of the 8 primary investors have already responded to the courtesy outreach. 2 more are pending. 1 has requested a formal meeting with you directly." "Which one?" "Hargrove Capital." Claire paused. "Daniel Hargrove specifically. He called this morning. He used the phrase long overdue." Vivian nodded. Daniel Hargrove had known Victor for 30 years and had met Vivian at her first public Ashcroft function at the age of 16. He had probably known, or suspected, for a long time. Men like Daniel Hargrove paid attention. "Set it up," Vivian said, before the gala. "There's a complication with the timeline." Claire turned a page in the folder. "Devereaux's team has been making calls as well. They're trying to reach the consortium members directly. So far they haven't gotten traction, but they will eventually. Let them try." Claire looked up. "Let them make the calls," Vivian said. "Let Dorian Falk spend the next 2 weeks explaining to the most careful financial minds in this city why their potential partner's legitimate empire was secretly underwritten by his ex-wife's family without his knowledge." She paused. "Every call they make is a liability for them. The more they say, the more the question becomes not what happened, but why he didn't know." Claire was quiet for a moment. And Selina Royce? Something in Vivian's expression shifted. Too small to name, too brief to catch. But Claire caught it because Claire paid attention to exactly that kind of thing. "Selina Royce is smart enough to start looking for an exit," Vivian said. "She'll stay until the optics of staying become more dangerous than the optics of leaving. That gives her approximately—" She glanced at the calendar on her desk. 12 days, give or take." "You sound certain." "I know how she thinks." Vivian said it without heat, just the flat delivery of someone stating a fact they'd had time to verify. "She thinks the way Lucian thinks, which is why they work. Which is why, when the structure fails, they'll both see the exit at the same time, and they'll both go through it, and they won't stop to check whether the other one made it." Claire nodded slowly. She closed the folder. "The gala," she said. You're going." "Yes." "Victor will accompany you." "Yes." "And when you walk in?" "When we walk in," Vivian said, "the room will do what rooms do. It will read the situation in about 45 seconds. And then every person in that ballroom who has spent the last 7 years wondering quietly why Lucien Devereaux's wife never spoke at functions, never appeared in photographs, never gave interviews, never participated in the performance of his success. Every one of those people is going to understand, all at once, why." She straightened the single document on her desk, centered it, pressed her palm flat against its surface for a moment, the way you might press your hand against something solid when the ground beneath you has been uncertain for a long time and you need to feel something that doesn't move. "Because the performance was never his," she said quietly. "It was mine. I just let him take the stage." Pause. On the 14th day before the gala, Dorian Falk sat down across from Lucien in the windowless office and laid out the numbers the way a doctor lays out a scan result, with clinical precision and the barely concealed understanding that the news is not good. 63% of the legitimate portfolio was Ashcroft-linked. Of the remaining 37%, 11 points were debt-financed through institutions that had Ashcroft Capital as a secondary guarantor. Of the true independent holdings, the businesses and properties that Lucien owned outright, free and clear, with no invisible thread running back to a family he had married into without understanding, the number was, when everything was calculated correctly, 26%. Of an empire he had believed was entirely his own, Lucien sat with this information for a long time. Falk did not fill the silence. "She knew," Lucien said finally. Not a question, not even really directed at Falk. More in the direction of the white ceiling, the plain walls, the room built for thinking about what was true. "She structured it," Falk said carefully. "Everything was structured in a way that preserved your operational autonomy while ensuring that the underlying financial stability was—" "She kept me running," Lucien said. Like a machine she maintained." He stopped. "And I never asked who was paying the power bill." Falk said nothing. "The gala," Lucien said. 14 days. If we cancel it, canceling signals collapse. You'll lose the remaining independent partners before you can. If we proceed and she walks in, she will walk in." Falk said it with quiet certainty. "I don't think there's a version of this where she doesn't walk in, Lucien." The room breathed its particular brand of stale, recirculated air, and Lucien Devereaux sat in the chair he had always sat in the room he had always used for conversations too dangerous for windows, and understood for the first time that the walls he was looking at had never actually belonged to him at all. and that the woman who had led him believe otherwise was already walking through the door of the building he couldn't afford to lose, and she was doing it in plain sight, and that was the part that was going to break him. Lucien understood this the way you understand something that has already happened, not as a warning, but as a verdict, arriving after the fact, after the evidence has been gathered and the jury has deliberated and gone home, and you are simply the last person in the room to be told the outcome. He sat in the windowless office for another 20 minutes after Falk left, alone with the numbers on the desk and the plain white ceiling, and the cold, particular silence of a man who has just discovered that the ground under everything he built was never actually his to stand on. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, walked out. Because men like Lucien Devereaux do not sit in rooms and absorb things. They move. They apply pressure. They find the weak point in the structure that's closing in on them, and they push until something gives. He just had to find the weak point. The problem, the specific, cold, increasingly apparent problem, was that he was looking for cracks in something Vivian Ashcroft had spent 7 years quietly, methodically, invisibly reinforcing. He called her on a Thursday morning, 11 days before the gala. Not through lawyers, not through intermediaries. He called her directly, on the number he still had in his phone under a name he had never updated. V, just the single letter, the way you abbreviate something you think you'll always be able to fill in from memory. She answered on the third ring. "Lucien," she said. No surprise, no warmth, no residual anything, just his name, delivered the way you acknowledge a piece of incoming information. "We need to talk," he said. "We're talking." In person. A pause, not hesitation, calculation. He knew the difference. He had always been able to read her silences, or believed he could, which he now understood were two entirely different things. "Why?" she said. "Because I want to understand." "Understand what?" He pressed his back teeth together, breathed out through his nose. "Why you built it the way you built it, all of it. Why you structured everything the way you did and never—" He stopped, started again. 7 years, Vivian. You could have told me at any point what you were doing, what you were actually doing. Why didn't you? The silence this time was longer. "You never asked," she said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Her voice was not cold exactly. Cold implies effort. This was simply the voice of a person who has moved past a thing and is no longer in the same room with it emotionally, even when they're still willing to stand in the doorway. "You never asked who I was before you. You never asked what I was capable of. You never asked what I was doing when you weren't looking. You didn't ask, Lucien, because you didn't think the answer would matter." "It mattered." "I know." A pause. "But you didn't know that until 3 days ago." He wanted to push back on this. He could feel the reflex of it, the instinct to reframe, to find the angle where he was less culpable, to construct the version of events where his blindness was partly her fault for not being louder about what she was. He had run that argument through his head 6 times in 3 days, and it kept arriving at the same place. It had no weight. It was the argument of a man who had looked at a locked door for 7 years and never once tried the handle, and was now standing on the wrong side of it, trying to explain that the door should have been more obvious. "I'm not calling to argue about the past," he said. "Then what are you calling about?" "The gala." Another silence. "I know you're planning to come," he said. "I know what it's going to look like when you do. I'm not asking you not to come." He stopped, recalibrated, because what he was actually asking was exactly that, and she would know it, and saying anything else would be the kind of move she had always seen through without appearing to look. "I want to know if there's a version of this that doesn't end with everything destroyed." "Everything you built, you mean?" "Yes." "Lucien," her voice was very quiet, "think carefully about what you just said. Everything you built." He didn't answer. "The Hartwell acquisition. Who identified the valuation gap that made it viable?" He said nothing. "The Callaway Street development. Who arranged the introductions with the city planning contacts that cleared the permit backlog in 6 weeks instead of 18 months? He closed his eyes. "The Meridian Tower. The Geneva Trusts. The 3-year campaign to move enough of your operational income through legitimate channels that the federal investigation had nothing credible to look at." Her voice remained even, not triumphant, not angry, just precise. The voice of a person presenting evidence, not making an argument. I'm not asking for credit, Lucien. And I'm asking you to be honest with yourself about what you're calling yours. A pause. What version of this are you asking me to help you save? His jaw was tight. His chest felt like something was pressing on it from the outside. Not pain exactly, but the physical awareness of a weight that had been there for days and was not getting lighter. A version where we both walk away with something, he said. I'm already walking away with something, she said. I'm walking away with everything that was mine. A pause. The gala, Lucien. I'll be there. Not to embarrass you, not to perform, to make sure that every person in that room understands the full picture before they make a decision that affects them. She paused once more. That's not cruelty. That's just accuracy. She ended the call. Lucien stood in the hallway outside the windowless office with the phone in his hand and looked at the wall in front of him, which was painted the same institutional white as everything else in this part of the building, and understood that the call had accomplished exactly nothing except confirming what he already knew, that there was no version of this that she would negotiate, and that the weak point he was looking for did not exist, and that if he was going to survive the next 11 days, he needed to stop looking for weaknesses in her position and start looking somewhere else entirely. He thought about where else there was to look, and then his phone rang again. It was a number he didn't recognize, a 212 area code, Manhattan, no name attached. He answered it because he always answered unknown numbers. In his world, the calls with no name attached were frequently the ones that mattered most. Mr. Devereaux. The voice was male, middle-aged, slightly accented, Eastern European, or a very careful approximation of it. My name is not important. What I have to tell you is, who gave you this number? The same person who has been giving things to various parties for the last several months without your knowledge. A pause. Mr. Devereaux, I represent certain interests that are, let us say, adjacent to your own. We have been observing the situation developing around your organization with considerable attention. Which situation? All of them. Another pause. But specifically the one involving your former wife and her father's financial network, and specifically the part of that situation that you do not yet know about. Lucien's hand tightened on the phone. I'm listening, he said. Not on this line. The voice was smooth and very measured. There's a restaurant on Vestry Street, Marchetti's, you know it. He knew it. He had not set foot in it for 8 years, not since the last time he had sat across from Carlo Marchetti's eldest son, and ended a very specific and very dangerous conversation by making very specific and very dangerous promises. The restaurant was nominally neutral ground, the kind of place where the ambient noise level and the careful architecture of the private dining rooms made surveillance effectively impossible. When? Lucien said. Tonight, 9 o'clock. A pause. Come alone, Mr. Devereaux. What I have to show you is not something you want witnessed. The line went dead. What? Marcus Webb thought it was a trap. He said so in 7 different ways across the 40 minutes they spent in the car on the way to Vestry Street, each version slightly more explicit than the last, and Lucien listened to all 7 and then got out of the car anyway, because the alternative was continuing to operate blind in a situation that was closing around him, and Lucien Devereaux had survived 15 years of a world that wanted to swallow him whole by choosing information over safety every single time the choice was available. The private dining room at the back of Marchetti's smelled like old wood and wine and the specific kind of privacy that gets maintained through very deliberate inattention on the part of very well-paid staff. A man was already seated when Lucien entered, compact, gray-haired, with the particular physical quietude of someone trained to be invisible in rooms. His suit was expensive and foreign. On the table in front of him was a slim manila folder and a glass of water he hadn't touched. Lucien sat down. The man looked at him without expression. Thank you for coming, he said. What do you have? Lucien said. The man slid the folder across the table. Lucien opened it. The first page was a financial transfer record. The numbers were substantial. 8 figures, routed through an instrument Lucien recognized immediately as one of the Geneva trust structures. The destination account was registered to an entity he did not recognize. Castellan Bridge Holdings, incorporated in the Cayman Islands, 11 months ago. I don't know this entity, Lucian said. No, the man said. You wouldn't. Lucian turned the page. The second document was a corporate registration. Castellan Bridge Holdings. Director of Record, Selina M. Royce. The room did not change. The light did not change. The ambient murmur of the restaurant beyond the closed door did not change. But something in the temperature of the air in the private dining room seemed to shift by several degrees, and Lucien sat very still with the document in his hands and felt his breathing do something he had not felt his breathing do since the night 15 years ago, when a man he trusted completely pointed a gun at him across a parking garage, and he understood, in the half-second before everything accelerated, that the world he thought he had been navigating had been an illusion constructed specifically to position him for exactly this moment. He turned to the third page. It was a communication record, encrypted messages, decoded, between an account registered to Castellan Bridge Holdings and an account he traced in 7 seconds to a law firm in Brussels that had represented Ashcroft Capital interests in 3 separate European transactions over the past decade. He read the messages. He read them again. How long? He said. His voice was very flat. The flatness was not calm. It was the sound of a man applying enormous, deliberate pressure to something that very much wants to come apart. The first contact was 14 months ago, the man said. Approximately 2 months after Ms. Royce began her relationship with you. He paused. She approached them, Mr. Devereaux, not the other way. She identified the Ashcroft connection in your financial structure, so through documents she accessed in her role as your consigliere, and she made contact with their representatives. She has been providing them with information about your operations, your timelines, and your financial vulnerabilities for over a year. Lucien set the folder down on the table. He pressed both palms flat against the surface. He looked at them. His own hands, the hands he had used to build every wall and every alliance and every carefully maintained advantage of the last 15 years. And he breathed in through his nose and out through his nose, and did not allow any of the things that wanted to happen to his face to happen. The gala announcement, he said. The investment consortium. She knew the timeline. She reported it to Ashcroft Capital representatives 6 weeks ago, before you had announced it publicly. The consortium members who went quiet. She provided them with the relevant documentation about the trust structure exposures, before your lawyers identified the problem internally. The man's voice remained level, informational. The voice of someone who has delivered bad news many times and has learned that the most merciful delivery is also the most direct. Miss Royce has been, in effect, coordinating with Vivian Ashcroft's network for the better part of a year. The situation you are currently in was not simply the result of your divorce. It was prepared, systematically, from the inside. Lucien looked up. The gray-haired man met his gaze without discomfort. Why are you telling me this? Lucien said. Because my principles have interests that intersect with yours in certain limited ways, the man said. And because the alternative, allowing you to walk into that ballroom in 11 days without understanding what has been done to you, serves no one that we care about. He paused. What you do with this information is entirely your own affair. Who are your principles? The man picked up his water glass for the first time, took a single small sip, and set it down again. People who would prefer that the current state of certain financial arrangements in this city not be resolved in a way that concentrates too much stability in a single family's hands. He said it without inflection, like a man reading a sentence he has read many times before. The Ashcroft empire absorbing your portfolio entirely is not an outcome that serves a balanced landscape. My principles would prefer you remain functional, reduced perhaps, but functional. Lucien picked up the folder. He closed it. He held it in both hands for a moment, the way you hold something that contains information you cannot unknow and cannot yet determine how to use. Then he stood. Tell your principals I'll be in touch, he said. He walked out. Alshad. He was in the car, moving north on West Street with Marcus Webb driving in silence because Marcus Webb had enough experience reading Lucien's silences to know when talking would be a fundamental error. When Lucien called Selina, she answered immediately. Where are you? He said. At the apartment. What's wrong? Nothing. He said it perfectly evenly. I need to see the investment timeline document you drafted for the consortium presentation, the one with the projected acquisition schedule. A pause. I can email it to you. I'd rather pick it up. I'm 5 minutes away. Another pause. Slightly longer. The pauses were information now. Every fractional hesitation, every micro beat of recalibration was a thing he could read with total clarity, the way you can suddenly read a language with perfect fluency once someone has told you the key. Sure, she said. I'll have it ready. He ended the call. He looked out the window at the city moving past. The lights on the river, the dark water. The bridges hung with their strings of amber light like something that wanted to look permanent. He had built an empire on the ability to know, before anyone else in the room, when a person had decided to be something other than what they claimed to be. He had survived 15 years on that ability. He had trusted it every time it mattered. Except once. He had trusted it with her, with both of them. And now he was sitting in a moving car, holding a folder full of documented betrayal, and heading toward an apartment where a woman who had been selling the architecture of his life to his enemies for over a year was standing in a room he had paid for and preparing to hand him a document and look at him with the perfectly calibrated expression of someone who has nothing to hide. He pressed the folder against his knee. His hand was steady. His chest was not. The car turned off West Street and the apartment building came into view, 22 stories of glass and steel, and the accumulated cost of years of choices that had felt like power and turned out to be something much more complicated. And Lucien Devereaux looked up at the lit windows and understood that when he walked through that door, whatever happened next would be the moment everything became irreversible. The moment that could not be walked back or recalibrated or finessed. The moment where the only currency left. The only currency left was truth, and he had never been particularly good at spending it. The elevator opened directly into the apartment's entrance foyer, a design feature that had felt like privacy when he chose this building and felt now like a trap, a single point of entry and exit that funneled everything through one narrow passage. Lucien stepped out. The foyer was lit low. The apartment beyond it was quiet in the way that apartments are quiet when someone has been waiting in them and has arranged the stillness very deliberately. Selina was in the living room. She was standing near the window. The same instinct he had, always put your back to the glass so you can see the room, with a document folder in her hand and an expression that was perfectly composed and perfectly wrong. He knew it was wrong, the same way you know a sound is wrong before you've identified what you're actually hearing. Something in the frequency of it, something in the way it arrived a half-second too prepared. She held out the folder. The acquisition timeline, she said. Pages 4 through 9 are the consortium projections. He crossed the room and took it from her. He didn't open it. He set it on the coffee table and looked at her. She held his gaze. She was good at that. Had always been good at that. The direct eye contact that read his confidence and was, he now understood, simply practice. Something wrong? She said. Tell me about Castellan Bridge Holdings, he said. The silence that followed lasted approximately 2 seconds. In Lucien's experience, 2 seconds was a very long time. A person with nothing to hide responds in under 1. A person assembling a lie needs 3 or more. 2 seconds was the silence of someone who had prepared for this possibility and was now selecting among prepared responses. I don't know what that is, she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. Try again, he said. Something moved across her face. Fast, controlled, but there. The micro-expression of a person whose prepared response has just been weighed and found insufficient, and who is now, in real time, recalculating. Lucien, 14 months, he said. That's what I want to understand. Not the what. I have the what. The transfer records, the communication logs, the corporate registration with your name on the director line. I have all of that. He took one step closer. Not threatening. He didn't need threatening. He needed her to understand that the geography of this conversation had changed and that there was no comfortable distance available anymore. I want to understand the 14 months. I want to understand sitting across from me every day, in every meeting, in every strategy session where I was making decisions based on information that you were simultaneously selling to the other side. I want to understand how you did that. Her jaw had tightened, barely visible, but he was very close now, and he was looking at her face with the full, unfiltered attention he had never given Vivian and was giving Selina now, too late, for entirely the wrong reasons. It wasn't... She stopped. Wasn't what? It wasn't selling. The word came out with a kind of compressed force, like something that had been under pressure and found a seam. I wasn't handing them weapons, Lucien. I was managing an exit. An exit for me. Her voice had changed. The composure was still there, but it was structural now, load-bearing. The composure of a person holding something up rather than the composure of a person with nothing to hold. I have been managing your exposure for 4 years. I have been the person who cleaned up after every decision you made that was too fast or too loud or too visible, and I have done it without credit and without acknowledgement, and with the complete understanding that if something went wrong, I was the expendable layer. She took a breath. I needed a position that didn't depend on your continued success. I needed something that would still exist if everything around you collapsed. So you made sure everything around me collapsed. I made sure I had somewhere to land when it did. Her voice cracked fractionally on the last word, not with emotion, with the effort of maintaining precision while the ground shifted. There's a difference. There isn't. He said it quietly. The quiet was worse than volume. It always was. You didn't just position yourself for an exit. You accelerated the collapse. You fed them the timeline. You fed them the consortium vulnerability. You gave them everything they needed to move before I could stabilize, and you did it while sitting in the chair next to mine and telling me we were going to be fine. He paused. That's not an exit strategy, Selena. That's demolition. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something he hadn't expected. She sat down. Just sat. In the chair nearest to her, and set her hands in her lap, and looked not at him, but at the floor in front of her feet. I knew about Vivian, she said. He went very still. Before you told me. Before the divorce proceedings. She didn't look up. I found the Ashcroft connection in the Geneva Trust documentation about 16 months ago. I pulled the corporate registry. I traced the beneficial ownership. A pause. I knew who she was before you did, Lucien. I knew what she was before you did. And I knew what it meant for you, for the portfolio, for the consortium. I knew all of it. And you said nothing. I said nothing. He looked at the top of her head, the careful arrangement of dark hair, the specific posture of a person who has decided that the most dangerous thing left available to them is honesty, and is deploying it now not out of remorse, but out of the calculation that it is the last card with any value. Why? He said. She looked up then. Her eyes were dry. She was not a person who cried, which he had always considered a form of strength and now considered a form of information. Because I needed time, she said. Time to build Castellan. Time to establish a position that didn't require your protection. Time to make myself useful to people who would still be standing when this came apart. She paused. You were going to lose this eventually, Lucien. The Ashcroft exposure, the federal attention, the Marchetti situation, it was always going to come apart. I just needed enough time to make sure I wasn't standing on it when it did. He turned away from her. He walked to the window. Below, the street ran its cold, indifferent course. Taxis, pedestrians. The city conducting its usual business with complete disregard for the specific disaster assembling itself on the 22nd floor of a glass building above it. He pressed one hand against the glass. Cold. Always cold. He seemed to keep finding himself in this position. His hand against cold glass, the city below, the accumulating weight of things he hadn't known until they had already done their damage. The gala is in 4 days, he said. I know. She's coming. I know that too. He turned. Are you coming? Selena met his eyes. In them was something he had not seen there before. Not guilt, not fear, not love, not loyalty. Just the clear-eyed, undecorated assessment of a woman who had played a very long game and was now sitting in the moment where the game resolves and seeing, plainly and without drama, what the resolution actually looks like. No, she said. I'm not coming to the gala. He nodded. Once. The nod of a man confirming information he had already processed. Get out of the apartment, he said. Tonight. Don't take anything that isn't yours. She stood. She straightened her jacket. She picked up her bag from the chair beside her. At the doorway to the foyer, she stopped, and without turning around, she said very quietly, For what it's worth, I did think early on that we could have built something real, before I understood what the foundation actually was. He didn't answer. The elevator doors opened and closed, and she was gone. He stood at the window for a long time after that. The city moved. The river ran its dark course to the south. Somewhere in a building he would never own, Vivian Ashcroft was sleeping, or working, or doing whatever Vivian Ashcroft did at this hour, in a life that had been entirely hers all along, and that she had simply, temporarily, quietly, allowed to overlap with his, and he stood in the apartment he had paid for with money that had moved through instruments she had constructed, in a life he had believed he'd built with his own hands, and he breathed, just breathed, in and out. The most basic thing a body can do when everything else has been taken away. Then he called Marcus Webb. "I need everything we have on the Marchetti situation," he said, "and I need it tonight." The gala occupied the grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel. 3 levels, 2,000 square feet of marble floor, a ceiling painted to resemble the sky at some undefined hour between dusk and dark, the hour when things are still beautiful, but you can feel the night coming. It had been booked 8 months ago. The invitation list had been curated for 6. Every detail had been designed to communicate a single, carefully constructed message. Lucien Devereaux had arrived, not as a criminal patriarch making a concession to legitimacy, but as a businessman of the first order whose empire was clean and stable and permanent and deserving of every partnership it was seeking. He arrived 40 minutes early. He stood in the empty ballroom with Marcus Webb 2 steps behind him and looked at the room the way a general looks at terrain before a battle, measuring sight lines, calculating positions, identifying the places where things could go wrong and the places where they couldn't be controlled regardless of preparation. The caterers moved around them. The florists made final adjustments. Staff tested the lighting in the 3 configurations they had prepared for different moments in the evening. Nobody spoke to him directly except Marcus, in brief, low exchanges that covered logistics and confirmed positions. "The Ashcroft vehicle was seen leaving the Midtown building 40 minutes ago," Marcus said. "How many in the car?" 2. "The driver and 1 passenger." A pause. "We couldn't confirm identity from the position we had." "It's her," Lucien said. "Yes." "Is Victor Ashcroft in the city?" "His plane landed at Teterboro this morning." Lucien looked at the entrance to the ballroom, the wide double doors at the far end of the room, the marble steps descending from street level, the position where anyone entering from the main entrance would be briefly, perfectly visible to the entire room before they descended to the floor. Whoever built this room had understood something about power and visibility, had understood that the most important moment in any gathering is the moment of arrival, when the room turns and assesses and decides, in the 3 seconds before rational thought catches up with instinct, what it is looking at, and whether it matters. He had been counting on that moment for himself. He understood now that he was going to share it. The guests began arriving at 7. By 7:45, the room had reached the density of sound and movement that signals a gathering has found its own momentum. The particular hum of 200 people who know each other, who have histories with each other, who are simultaneously socializing and calculating, the way people at this level of money and influence always simultaneously socialize and calculate, because for them, the 2 activities have never been meaningfully distinct. Lucien moved through it. He shook hands. He said the right things. He wore the right expression. Not too eager, not too controlled. The precise calibration of a man who has everything he needs and is gracious enough not to require anyone to acknowledge it. He had practiced this particular performance for 15 years, and he was very good at it. He was running it now on the structural equivalent of nothing. No foundation, no certainty, no knowledge of what the next 40 minutes would produce. And he was running it well, because the only alternative was to let the room see what was actually happening, and the room could not see that. Daniel Hargrove found him near the bar at 8:15. Hargrove was 71, silver-haired, the kind of permanently tanned man who divides his time between New York and somewhere with a better winter, with the particular social ease of someone whose money is old enough that he has never needed to be aggressive about it. He shook Lucien's hand, held it a beat longer than a normal handshake, looked at him with eyes that were kind and entirely without illusion. "Good room," Hargrove said. "Thank you for coming, Daniel. Wouldn't miss it." He released Lucien's hand. His eyes moved briefly across the room and came back. "How are you holding up?" It was not a party question. It was a question from a man who knew exactly what was happening and was asking something real. "Fine," Lucian said. Hargrove nodded, the nod of a man who accepts an answer he knows is incomplete because the time and place are wrong for anything more honest. "I've always thought," Hargrove said, as though continuing a conversation they'd been having for some time, "that the most dangerous thing in business is a structure you don't fully understand, especially when the part you don't understand is the part holding everything else up." He took a sip of his drink, set it down. "I've been in business for 46 years. The structures that last are the ones where the people inside them know exactly what they're standing on." He looked at Lucien steadily. "I didn't know," Lucien said. He said it without inflection or defense. Just said it, which was the first completely honest thing he had said to anyone in this room in 15 years. Hargrove held his gaze for a moment. "No," he said. "I didn't think you did." He paused. "That's both better and worse than the alternative, son." He moved away into the room, smooth and unhurried, leaving Lucien standing with his drink and the word son, which Hargrove had deployed with the kind of precision that old men with real authority sometimes use. Not as condescension, but as the specific gravity of a man who has watched another man make a fundamental error, and is, despite everything, not without sympathy for it. The room's sound level dropped at exactly 8:43, not all at once. The way sound drops in a large room when something has shifted in the attention of the people inside it. A gradual refocusing, a reorientation of faces and bodies toward a single point. A wave of awareness moving from the entrance inward through the crowd like a frequency only people can carry. Lucian turned. At the top of the marble steps, in the wide frame of the double doors, Victor Ashcroft stood with his daughter on his arm. Vivienne was in dark blue, not the charcoal gray of practicality or the careful invisibility of a woman making herself small in someone else's room. This was a color chosen with intent, a deep, specific blue that read, in the light of the ballroom's carefully designed illumination, as both formal and entirely assured. Her hair was down. She wore no jewelry except one piece at her throat. A single piece, understated, unmistakably significant, the kind of jewelry that doesn't communicate wealth but authority, the kind worn by women who have never needed to announce what they are. She stood at the top of those steps, and she looked at the room below her with an expression that was not triumphant and not cold, and was not performing anything at all. And that absence of performance was, in the specific economy of this specific room, more devastating than any expression she could have chosen, because every person in that ballroom who dealt in the currency of performance understood immediately that they were looking at someone who had never needed it. Victor Ashcroft descended the steps with the unhurried certainty of a man who has attended many rooms and has never been uncertain of his place in any of them. Vivienne descended beside him. Lucien stood 15 feet away and watched his ex-wife walk into the room he had built to announce his arrival, in a dress the color of deep water, on the arm of the man who owned the ground it was all standing on. The room had already reconfigured, he could feel it without looking. The subtle reorientation of bodies, the micro-adjustments of people who are reevaluating what they thought they were attending and beginning to understand what it actually is. 20 years of reading rooms told him everything his eyes couldn't show him directly. The consortium members near the east wall who had gone quiet, the city officials near the bar who had suddenly developed a close interest in their drinks, the investment partners he had specifically positioned near the presentation stage, who were now, with the particular careful casualness of people who do not want to appear to be moving, redistributing themselves through the space. Victor Ashcroft had not spoken yet. He didn't need to. His presence in the room was the statement. His daughter beside him was the evidence. The room was already doing the arithmetic. Vivienne's eyes found Lucian's across the distance of the ballroom floor. She held his gaze for a moment. Not long, not with drama, just long enough to make the acknowledgement complete. And then she looked away, toward the people approaching her father, toward the room opening up around her like a thing that had always been hers and had simply been in temporary use. Dorian Falk materialized at Lucian's left shoulder. "Sir," Falk said very quietly, "Victor Ashcroft has requested 5 minutes with the consortium lead investors. Apparently he's scheduled a brief address before the formal presentations begin." Lucian kept his eyes on the room. "When?" he said. 9 o'clock. Falk paused. "That's 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Lucian held his drink without drinking from it. His chest was doing the thing it had been doing for the better part of 2 weeks. The pressure, the awareness of weight, the physical vocabulary of a man standing on ground that is no longer stable and whose body has registered this information slightly ahead of his capacity to act on it. He looked at Vivian across the room. She was speaking with Daniel Hargrove now. Hargrove was laughing at something she had said, genuinely, not the performed laughter of social obligation, but the real thing, the laugh of a man who has been reminded of something he already knew and finds it satisfying to have it confirmed. She had not looked back at Lucian since that single exchange of eye contact. She didn't need to. He had 11 minutes to decide whether to stand in this ballroom and allow Victor Ashcroft to address the investors he had spent 8 months assembling, or to do something else, something he had no plan for and no certainty about, something that required abandoning the controlled performance he had been running all evening and replacing it with whatever was underneath it, whatever the real thing was, the thing he had not shown anyone in this room or any room, because in his world the real thing was always the most dangerous thing to expose. He set his drink down on the nearest surface. He moved through the crowd, not toward the exit, not toward Marcus Webb, toward the front of the room, toward the low platform where the presentations were scheduled, toward the microphone that was set up for him to announce the new chapter of his empire to the assembled witnesses of everything he had built. And he did not have a speech prepared for what he was about to say, and he did not know how it would land, and for the first time in 15 years, Lucien Devereaux walked toward a room full of powerful people without knowing what was going to come out of his mouth, only that it was going to be the truth, because every other available option had already cost him everything it had to take. He reached the platform in 11 steps. He counted them without meaning to. An old habit, the instinct to measure distance and time even when the destination had no guaranteed outcome. The microphone stand was positioned center stage, adjusted to his height by a staff member who had done so 2 hours ago based on specifications provided by an event coordinator who had no idea that the speech about to be delivered into it would bear no resemblance to the one filed with the program. He stepped up. The room did not go immediately quiet. Rooms never do, not at first. There is always the lag, the ripple of awareness moving outward from the point of attention, the gradual cessation of smaller conversations as people register that something is happening at the front and orient themselves toward it. He stood and waited for the quiet and watched it come, and in the 15 seconds it took for the ballroom to fully settle, he looked at the room the way he had looked at it from the entrance 40 minutes ago, measuring, calculating, and understood that this measurement was different because this time he was not looking for advantage. He was looking at people, just people, some of whom he had used, some of whom had used him, most of whom existed in the complicated middle territory of mutual convenience that passes for alliance in rooms like this one. The quiet arrived. Victor Ashcroft near the east wall with Vivian beside him and 3 consortium members in close attendance turned and looked at the platform. His expression did not change. He had the patience of a man who has learned that the most revealing thing about another person is what they do when they have nothing left to protect. Lucien looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Vivian. She was watching him with an expression he could not categorize, which was unusual because he had believed for 7 years that he could read her. He understood now that what he had been reading was the surface she allowed. The careful, controlled presentation of a woman making herself legible to a man who would not have understood the original. What was on her face now was the real thing, and it was not triumph, and it was not pity, and it was not the satisfaction of a person watching a long-planned outcome arrive. It was something quieter and more complicated than any of those. The expression of someone who has not yet decided what this moment means and is watching it unfold with genuine, unguarded attention. He looked away from her, looked at the microphone. "I had a speech," he said. His voice carried without effort in the acoustics of the ballroom, which had been designed for exactly this, for the projection of a single voice to 200 people who were being asked to listen. 12 pages. My lawyers spent 3 weeks on it. There were remarks about vision and partnership and the future of legitimate enterprise in this city. He paused. "I'm not going to give that speech." The room was completely still. "My name is Lucien Devereaux. Most of you know what that name has meant in this city for the last 15 years. And most of you came here tonight because you believe that what it's going to mean going forward was worth your time and your investment and your association. He looked out at the faces. I owe you an accurate picture of what you're actually looking at, so let me give you one. He breathed in. The air in the ballroom was warm and lightly scented with the particular combination of flowers and candle wax and expensive food that defines these gatherings, the sensory vocabulary of power performing itself. He had stood in rooms like this hundreds of times and had always felt, on some level, at home in them. He did not feel at home now. He felt exposed, which was a different thing entirely and considerably more honest. The legitimate portfolio you were presented with tonight is real. The businesses are real. The revenue figures are real. What was not accurately represented, what I did not accurately understand until 2 weeks ago, is the degree to which that portfolio was built on a financial foundation that I did not construct and did not control. He paused. The Ashcroft Capital connection you may have already heard about is accurate. Approximately 60% of the legitimate holdings in the portfolio presented tonight were underwritten, structured, or stabilized through instruments connected to Ashcroft Capital Holdings over a period of 7 years without my full knowledge. A sound moved through the room, not loud, just the collective involuntary adjustment of 200 people recalibrating. I'm not standing here to assign blame for that, or to construct a version of events that makes me look better than I am. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. I built an organization on the principle that you don't show weakness. You don't show uncertainty. You control the information, and you control the room, and you never let anyone see the place where you don't know what you're doing. Trolls. He paused. That principle served me for a long time. It also meant that I spent 7 years sitting next to a person who was quietly, systematically keeping everything I believed I had built from collapsing. And I never looked closely enough to understand what she was actually doing. He found Vivian's face in the crowd. She had not moved. Her expression had shifted. Something had opened in it, very slightly, the way a room opens when someone finally turns on a light that has been off for a long time. I'm not asking for your investment tonight, he said. I'm not asking for your partnership, your association, or your patience. What I built was not what I represented it to be, and you deserve to know that before you make any decision about whether any version of it is worth your time. He paused one last time. That's everything I have to say. He stepped back from the microphone. The room held its silence for 3 full seconds. A very long time, in a room full of people who deal in fractions of seconds and have strong opinions about all of them. Then Victor Ashcroft began to move toward the platform. He did not take the microphone. He stopped at the edge of the platform and looked up at Lucien with the expression of a man who has just watched something unexpected happen and is deciding in real time what it means. Walk with me, Victor said. It was not loud enough for the room to hear. Just the two of them, the old man looking up at the younger one, and the 4 words delivered with no particular urgency and no particular warmth and no particular hostility. Just the direct, undecorated request of a man who has decided that a conversation needs to happen and sees no reason to delay it. Lucien stepped down from the platform. They walked together through the service door at the side of the ballroom, into the corridor beyond. Plain walls, functional lighting, the working interior of a building that saves its beauty for the spaces where beauty is commercially useful. The sound of the ballroom fell behind them and then became muffled and then became, around a corner, essentially silent. Victor stopped walking. He turned and looked at Lucien. That took something, he said. Don't, Lucien said. Don't what? Don't make it a moment. I didn't say those things for credit. Victor studied him. His eyes were dark and very clear, the eyes of a man whose vision had sharpened rather than dimmed with age, who saw things not less distinctly but more so, with the additional depth of someone who has watched enough outcomes to understand causes. Why did you say them? Victor said. Lucien leaned his back against the corridor wall. The plaster was cool through the fabric of his jacket. He looked at the ceiling. Functional, plain, a working ceiling in a working corridor. No decoration, no pretense. Because I spent 15 years building something that I told myself was mine, he said. And I needed the people in that room to know that I understand now, that it wasn't. That's all. He paused. And because she was standing there, and I didn't want her to stand there and watch me perform one more thing that wasn't true. Victor was quiet for a moment. She didn't plan this to humiliate you, Victor said. I want you to understand that. She planned it to be accurate. There's a distinction. I know. She spent 7 years. I know what she spent, Lucian said. His voice had an edge, but not anger. Something rawer than anger. The particular vocal texture of a man who has processed something all the way down to its core and is now living in the aftermath of that processing, which is not peaceful, but is real. I know exactly what she spent, Victor, because I've spent the last 2 weeks reading every document and tracing every instrument and following every anonymous trust structure back to its origin. And what I found was a person who kept something alive for 7 years because she believed in it even when it didn't deserve to be believed in. He looked at the old man directly. I don't know what that says about her. It probably says something very good, but I know what it says about me. Victor held his gaze without filling the silence. What do you want? Victor said. Not tonight. Not the consortium. Not the portfolio. What do you actually want? It was the question no one had asked him in 15 years. Maybe longer. It was the question he had not asked himself, because in the world he had inhabited, the question was irrelevant. In that world, you identified what was available and you took it, and what you wanted in any personal, unstrategic sense was a luxury that the structure of your life did not have room to accommodate. I want to owe no one anything, Lucian said. I want to build something that is actually mine, even if it's smaller, even if it's... He stopped, found the word that belonged there with some difficulty. Honest. He said it like a man testing weight on a word he has not used in a long time and is not certain will hold. I want to walk away from everything that belongs to you or to her or to any structure I didn't understand when I walked into it. And I want to do something with what's left. He paused. If anything is left, Victor looked at him for a long time. There's a management position, Victor said. Real estate development company in Cincinnati. Nothing glamorous. Mid-size portfolio, underperforming by about 30%. Needs someone who understands how organizations work when they're under pressure and knows how to make hard decisions without losing people in the process. He paused. It's not New York. It's not what you're used to. The salary would make you laugh or make you sick. I haven't decided which. He paused again. But it's clean, and it would be yours. The work would be yours. Lucien looked at him. Why would you offer me anything? Because my daughter spent 7 years keeping something going because she believed the person at the center of it had something real in him underneath the performance. Victor's voice was even, without sentiment. I'm not offering you this because I like you, or because I think you've earned it. I'm offering it because she saw something, and my daughter does not see things that aren't there. He held Lucien's gaze. Don't make her wrong about you. That's all I'm asking. He went back into the ballroom. He had to. There were conversations to be finished, damage of a specific and adult kind to be properly acknowledged, the various small and large severances of an empire dissolving to be handled with whatever grace was available to him. He shook hands with people who were leaving his orbit and did it without resentment. He spoke with consortium members who had questions and answered them with the same plain accuracy he had used at the microphone. He watched the room gradually reconfigure around the new reality, the way rooms always do, because rooms full of people with resources and options do not grieve long. They adapt, they reposition, they identify the next thing. He found Vivian near the end of the evening, when the crowd had thinned to perhaps 40 people, and the caterers were beginning their quiet clearing operations, and the room had taken on the particular quality of a late party, slightly disheveled, genuine in a way that full gatherings never are. She was standing near the window on the east side of the room, not performing anything, just looking out at the Manhattan night, a glass of water in her hand. Not wine, he noticed. She had never drunk much at these things, another detail he had not paid sufficient attention to. He stopped beside her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Below the window, the city ran its perpetual course, all those separate urgent lives pressing against each other in the dark. I didn't know, he said, what you were doing. I want you to know that I'm not... He stopped. I'm not saying it as a defense. I'm saying it because I think you deserve to know that I wasn't pretending not to see. I genuinely didn't see. And I have thought about what that means about me, and what it means is not complicated. Vivian looked at him with the same unguarded expression she had worn from the platform. The real one. the one not constructed for the room. "I know you didn't see," she said. "That was always the part that was hardest." She paused. "Not the taking credit, not the public performance, the not seeing, the fact that you looked at me every day for 7 years and what you saw was someone who didn't matter enough to understand." She said it without bitterness, which made it hit harder than bitterness would have. Just the plain statement of a factual wound. "That was the part I couldn't keep carrying." "No," he said. "You shouldn't have had to carry it." She looked at her water glass, set it on the windowsill, looked back out at the city. "Your speech tonight," she said. "I meant it." "I know you did." A pause. "That's why I'm still standing here." He looked at her profile against the dark window, the clean line of her jaw, the particular set of her shoulders that he had spent 7 years reading as composure and now understood was something more fundamental than that. The physical expression of a person who has always known exactly where they stand and has never needed external confirmation to stay upright. "The position your father mentioned," he said. "He told you about Cincinnati." "He told me. And I'm going to take it." He said it without drama, without the slight upward inflection that would signal uncertainty or make the statement a question seeking validation. Just said it, flat, real, decided. "It's the right thing. It's the only thing, actually, that makes any sense." She turned and looked at him fully, for the first time in the conversation. Fully, with that complete, unfiltered attention that she had apparently always been capable of, and that he was only now, too late and in the wrong direction, beginning to understand the value of. "Good," she said. "I'm not asking you for anything," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not standing here because I think there's a version of this that ends differently between us. I know what I cost you. I know you're not going to—" He paused, and for a moment something in his face did what faces do when the controlled surface fails briefly, and the real thing is visible underneath, raw and unguarded and not particularly dignified. "I'm not asking." "I know you're not," she said. "I just needed to say the things I said tonight, in front of people, out loud." He looked at her steadily. "And I needed to say this to you directly, that you weren't a burden, that you were never what I told myself you were, and that I understand now what you actually were and what it cost you to be that, and that I'm sorry I was never the person who deserved to know." The ballroom around them had grown quieter still. The caterers moved in the background with practiced efficiency. Somewhere across the room, a glass was set down with a faint sound. Outside the window, New York continued its indifferent and magnificent operation, all that light and motion, all that accumulated human ambition pressing outward into the dark. Vivian looked at him for a long time. "Go to Cincinnati," she said. "Do the work, the real work." A pause. "And stop building things you don't understand the foundation of." He nodded. "Once. The nod of a man receiving information he intends to keep." She picked up her water glass from the windowsill. She turned back to the room. He stood there a moment longer. Then he turned and walked in the other direction, toward the exit, through the diminished room, past the people and the flowers, and the carefully constructed backdrop of an announcement that had become something none of them had planned for and all of them would remember. At the door he stopped and looked back once. Not at her, specifically, just at the room, taking it in for the last time. The particular version of himself that had existed in rooms like this one for 15 years, standing in the frame of the exit. Then he left. 2 years passed the way years pass when you are doing actual work. Not quickly, not slowly, but with the specific texture of time that is fully occupied, that has weight and evidence, that leaves calluses. In Cincinnati, Lucien Devereaux ran a mid-sized real estate development company with a portfolio of 11 properties, 3 of which had been underperforming when he arrived, and 2 of which were turning a modest profit by the end of his first year. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner on a street with no particular prestige and paid his rent on the 1st of every month. He drove a car that was 7 years old and had a long scratch on the passenger door from a parking lot incident he had not witnessed and did not bother to repair. He ate at the diner 3 blocks from his office more mornings than not because the coffee was reliably hot and nobody there knew who he used to be and nobody cared to find out. He worked. That was the most accurate description of what he did for 2 years. He worked in the plain and undecorated sense of the word, the kind of work that cannot be delegated or performed for an audience because there is no audience, only the problem in front of you and the tools available to address it, and the gap between those two things that has to be closed through the application of sustained, honest effort. He was not happy exactly in those first months. He was not unhappy. He was something harder to name, present maybe, in a way he had never been required to be when the performance was always running in the background, consuming the attention that should have been going elsewhere. He had the particular experience of a man who has been very loud for a long time, suddenly living in quiet, the initial discomfort of it, the instinct to fill it, and then, gradually, the discovery that silence is not a vacuum, but a condition, and that things grow in it that cannot grow in noise. He saved money. Not because he had to, the salary was modest but sufficient, but because saving felt like the right discipline for someone who was trying to understand the difference between what things cost and what they're worth. On a Tuesday morning in the early spring of the second year, he withdrew $10,000 from his savings account in the form of a cashier's check. He wrote Vivian's name on the payable line in handwriting that was neither elegant nor careless, just legible and deliberate. He put the check in an envelope with a piece of paper on which he had written, by hand, 3 sentences. He had drafted those sentences 11 times over 3 days before he was satisfied that they said what he meant and nothing more than what he meant. The note read, "You were right about everything that mattered. This is the same 10,000. It took me a while to earn it honestly, and I thought you should be the one to decide what it's worth now." He mailed it to Ashcroft Capital's New York headquarters, addressed to her directly. He did not include a return address, not because he was hiding, but because the note did not require a response, and he did not want her to feel obligated to provide one. He walked back to his office from the post office with his hands in his jacket pockets, in the thin, early spring air of a city that had never known his name and would not mourn its ignorance. And he felt something in his chest that had no precise vocabulary. A settling, maybe. The physical sensation of a thing that has been unbalanced for a very long time, finally finding its level. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. Vivian's assistant brought it to her office on the 41st floor of Ashcroft Capital's headquarters, where she had been working since 7 that morning on the reorganization of the Ashcroft Foundation's philanthropic portfolio, a project she had been leading for 18 months that had redirected $240 million toward education and economic recovery initiatives in cities the foundation had previously ignored in favor of more prestigious giving. She recognized the handwriting on the envelope immediately. She set it on her desk and looked at it for a moment before opening it, which was unusual for her. She was not a person who delayed things. But this was not a delay born of reluctance. It was the brief, instinctive pause of someone who understands that certain moments deserve to be met with attention rather than efficiency. She opened it. She read the 3 sentences. She read them again. She looked at the cashier's check for $10,000, made out in her name, dated 3 days ago, drawn on a bank in Cincinnati, Ohio. She sat with it for a long time. Then she called her foundation director. "The Second Chance Employment Fund," she said, "the one we've been trying to fully capitalize. What's the current gap?" "About $9,800, her director said. "Give or take. I'm sending you a check for $10,000 today." She paused. "Designate the remainder for administrative costs. I want this one to go in without fanfare." "Of course." "Any designation on the record for the donor?" Vivian looked at the 3 sentences on the plain piece of paper, at the handwriting that was neither elegant nor careless, just deliberate and honest and exactly what it was. "Anonymous," she said. She folded the note carefully. She placed it in the inner pocket of her portfolio, not in the filing cabinet, not in the archive. In the pocket she carried with her, which was a thing she did not examine too closely because some decisions explain themselves adequately through action and do not require additional analysis. She went back to work. Outside the window of the 41st floor, New York went about its business in the specific key of late morning in early spring, the light coming in at an angle that made everything look briefly and unexpectedly forgiving, the city doing what the city always does, which is move forward, regardless of everything, with the enormous and indifferent momentum of a thing that was never waiting for anyone to be ready. She was not waiting either. She had not been waiting for a long time. The foundation work expanded. The portfolio grew in the right directions. She took meetings with the right people and declined meetings with the wrong ones, and made decisions that sometimes cost her socially and financially in the short term and proved correct in the longer view, because she had always been better at the longer view than at the short one, had always been able to see the shape of things from a distance that most people found uncomfortable to maintain. She did not think about Lucien Devereaux often. When she did, it was not with anger or grief or the specific complicated weight of something unresolved. It was with the clean, occasional acknowledgement that a thing had happened and had changed her and had cost her, and had ultimately, when everything was settled and the account was closed, given her something she would not have found any other way, the absolute certainty, bone deep and permanent, of exactly what she was capable of and exactly what she was worth, measured not in someone else's estimation, but in her own. That knowledge did not make her happy the way uncomplicated things make people happy. It made her something more durable than happy. It made her sure. And in Cincinnati, in a modest apartment above a dry cleaner, on a street with no prestige, a man who had once commanded an empire of fear went to sleep on a Tuesday night with nothing remarkable to report. The day's work done, the accounts in order, the quiet of a life earned rather than performed, settling around him like a thing he had not known he was building until it was already there, solid and unglamorous and entirely, finally, his own. Neither of them was the person they had been. Both of them, in the end, had gotten exactly what they actually needed, which is not the same thing as what either of them had wanted, but is, in the accounting of lives honestly lived, considerably more valuable. The debt was paid, the story was done.